Have you ever been somewhere you knew you didn't belong, but couldn't bring yourself to leave? That's how it started for Ethan the night he found the mask. The antique shop was practically a ruin, boards half nailed to the windows, a flickering sign that read, "Closed forever." But the door was slightly ajar, and Ethan, always a sucker for old creepy things, couldn't resist. Inside, it smelled like mildew and memories, with shelves of forgotten trinkets gathering dust. And then, he saw it. The mask hung on the far wall, separate from the rest, as if it didn't want company. It gleamed in the dim light, its surface shifting between black and crimson, almost like it was breathing. Its hollow eyes seemed to follow him, pulling him closer. Against all logic, Ethan felt drawn to it. His hand trembled as he reached for it. The second his fingers touched the smooth surface, a sharp chill ran up his arm, like ice burning through his veins. The air around him thickened, and a faint, raspy voice seemed to come from nowhere.
"Put it on,"
it whispered. Ethan spun around, but the shop was empty. The voice had sounded so close, like someone had whispered right into his ear. He shook his head, trying to snap out of it. But when he looked back at the mask, it was already in his hands. He didn't remember picking it up. Before he could stop himself, he raised the mask to his face. The instant it touched his skin, the shop dissolved into darkness. When he opened his eyes, Ethan was standing in a warped version of the shop. The walls were lined with masks, twisted, grotesque faces frozen in expressions of agony. They weren't just decorations. Ethan could feel them watching him.
"Hello?"
he called out, his voice echoing unnaturally. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man with impossibly long limbs, his face obscured by a mask that seemed stitched together from pieces of others. He held another mask in his claw-like hand, turning it over slowly.
"You shouldn't have touched it,"
the figure said, his voice low and cold, like a distant storm.
"But now, you're mine."
Ethan tried to move, to run, but his body felt like it wasn't his own. His hands trembled as they reached for his face, and he realized with growing horror that he wasn't wearing the mask. He was the mask. The masked man stepped closer, his eyes glowing faintly behind the grotesque face he wore. He raised the mask in his hand, showing Ethan his reflection in its polished surface. It wasn't his face staring back. It was someone else, distorted, terrified, frozen in time. Ethan opened his mouth to scream, but the sound never came.
"Once you wear it,"
the figure whispered,
"you can't escape."
The next day, the mask was back on the wall, waiting. It shimmered faintly in the light, as though it was alive, waiting for the next curious soul to wander in.